All right, today we're going to do a review, setup, and tune of the iFlight BumbleBee HD Cinewhoop. So one of the first things you're going to want to do on this is, of course, bind it to your DJI transmitter. So you'd have to power it up, and I'll put a link in the video description for how you bind it to your DJI transmitter, and you want to get that all bound and linked up. From there, it should fly if you just want to go right to flying it. But I want to check out in Betaflight some of the settings, see what it's like. The iFlight Cinewhoop, it's pre-tuned from the manufacturers, but there's some other settings I want to take a look at and kind of customize for my liking. So we're going to pop in the Betaflight here in a second, and I'll show you what I would change. The other thing we need to do is take this little dongle and get that inserted on the flight controller. So this is an all-in-one flight controller, which the ESC is integrated into it. We have to take this dongle that's provided by iFlight, and you have to kind of nest it down through here, and it's tight. And you want to bring that around and kind of just get it in there, and then you can kind of see on there where you can't really see the USB-C connector, but you can see it kind of made it up with it, and then I can push that in and snap it in. Now what's nice with this is it is flush, and when you have a battery on there, you could leave that on if you desire to. If you do that, I would probably recommend taking some hot glue, which I'll probably do, is just dab it in between the two so you get the strength of both of the USB connectors holding that together. Obviously in a big crash, that's going to be important. You could also do some structural work here. You just don't want to have it just reliant on that USB-C connector if you do leave this in, but you could do that. I think with enough hot glue mechanism there, you could keep that secure and it wouldn't snap off, and you could leave that on. When you're putting a 4S battery on here, it is clear of it, so you don't have to worry about that, so that's nice. Of course, before powering up to bind your air unit to the DJI transmitter, do make sure to put on the antennas before you, of course, plug this in to battery power, LiPo power. It does come with a connector here pre-wired to the flight controller, so if you want to put on a receiver for crossfire or whatever you want, so that has your 5-volt ground and RX and TX wired there. You could snip that or just plug that directly into something if you had that kind of connector on your receiver. Okay, so now that we have that all connected to our computer here, I'm going to go ahead and connect to Betaflight. And the first thing I'd recommend doing is getting it flat on a desk and hit the calibrated accelerometer that was a little off when I received it, so it smooths it out, so when you're in angle mode, obviously it's not going to drift left or right, or it's going to be level as possible. So go ahead and do that. Ports tab's all set up for you already, so you're in good shape there. Now what you see here is the default from iFlight, so I'm going to make some tweaks to it. I did count out the motor magnets. There is 14 and 6 is the idle they have, which is fine. One thing I am going to do is, since it's an indoor, I really like when I go to zero throttle on my indoor quads to have the motors stop. I don't want them to keep spinning until I disarm, just so if I'm setting it down in some carpet and whatnot, when I go to zero throttle, I don't have to also disarm at the same time or crash, things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and click motor stop. What that will allow is, obviously, when I arm the craft, the motors won't start to spin until I raise throttle just a little bit, and then they'll spin up and go from there. Now, a key with that is you have to have air mode off. If you have air mode turned on, then motor stop doesn't work. So I'm going to go down here as well, and I'm going to turn air mode off. And we'll set that air mode only turns active when you're in rate mode, not in angle or horizon. So I'll do that as well, turn air mode off. The other thing I want to do is I am going to fly this inside or outside, so I always like to have some sort of lost alarm. This doesn't have a buzzer built on board, so all these don't really matter, and although they're enabled. But I do want to click on the motor beep so that if my transmitter becomes disconnected or I set up a beeper, which I'm going to do as well, I can have the motors beep for me. Okay, so that rounds off the changes we'll make there, and then we'll just go ahead and hit save and reboot. After reconnecting, there's nothing in battery. There's nothing in PID tuning for now, so we'll come back to this in a little bit. But you can see it's a custom PID tune. And I've actually talked to iFlight. This is coming from, I believe, some of my videos, because 45, and just coordinating with them a little bit. So we'll see how that works out. I don't know if this is specifically tuned for this craft or just some presets that I've used on some 5-inch stuff. So we'll see how it works, but it looks very familiar to me. Same thing with some of the settings here. I do want to have two different rate profiles. So we have rate profile 1 and rate profile 2. I don't see any custom settings there, but I want to go into rate profile 2, and I want to have these for acro rates for some outdoor stuff. So we're going to set that up. 0.3, 0.76. Okay, so after a little tweaking, it always seems like in the configurator the rates are always tweaked a little bit. I'm always usually going for 1,000 degrees per second, goes up or down. So it's usually 1.3 for me, 0.3, and 0.74 for super rate, but make that to your liking. The other thing I'm going to do in here is I'm going to set the TPA to 0.8 attenuation, and I'm going to set this to 1750. That's just for me. That's just on this rate profile, the acro rate profile. So I don't want D term to be attenuated in acro. It's fine in rate profile 1, which we'll use indoors. But for rate profile 2, we're going to turn that up a little bit. So at basically 75% throttle, the D term starts to ramp down on its gain. At 100% throttle, the D term will be attenuated to 80%. So it's quite a bit. And that's going to honestly be rare to see that on here. But if we have any D term noise, it's going to let that settle down so we don't get any shakes going into 100% throttle punches. Going back to rate profile 1, I did get an opportunity to maiden this a little bit inside. It was real touchy on the throttle, and you want to be able to move up and down nice and slow. So I'm going to have the throttle expo be 0.8, and it hovers throttle around 35%. I have to tweak that in a little bit more, but it's 35 to 45% it seems on a 4S battery. It was a 1500 mAh 4S battery, so we'll set that for there, and we'll come back to that and tweak that in as we need. But that should give me nice slow throttle resolution to keep it, my elevation gains or losses nice and smooth. Again, this is in rate profile 1 for indoors. For outdoors and more acro flying, we're not gonna make those adjustments. Popping over to the filter tab, I didn't change anything here. This is, a pretty good start. It did happen to look at the Blackbox real quick on this. The vibrations, and I'll show you here in a second, are really good on this. So 1.3, 1.3, I think is a good start. They have RPM filtering set up. They have this set to low, and 90. I think 90 is good as well, because it was some little bitty frame resonances that the dynamic notch was jumping on. I don't think they were down so far as 90. I think they were like 120, 130. So let me pop that open. We'll take a look at that right now. So this log was actually on the iFlight Cinewhoop when I received it. So somebody at the factory or one of their pilots took it out and gave it a flight. It looked like it was an acro flight to me. Probably testing out the tune, things of that nature. A lot of throttle up and throttle down positions. And you can see some of the noise and some of the things we could maybe work on here. How we're not really on top of set point as much as probably we could be, so we'll tweak that in a little bit. But looking at trace template 0, if we look at the pre-filtered noise on the roll, we get this spectrograph, so we can make that a little bit bigger here. And this is what we want to see. We want to see very little to no noise down here from 50, 30 up to 200 hertz. You want to see this big trough in here. Our control frequencies are down below the 90 hertz range, 100 hertz, 90 hertz. And from up here, this is all our motor peak noise. So we want to, that's going to this is prior to any software filtering. So we can see what it's going to look like after the software filtering. And bam, the RPM filter with the dynamic notch and low passes completely crush all that out. This is what the pre-filtered noise looks like on the pitch axis. This is post-filtering, pre-filtered noise on yaw axis, and post-filtered here again. Now I did do that maiden flight like I talked about, so we're going to switch down to that here. And then in that, when I run the spectrographs for the pre-filtered, you can see these little bit of spikes here for some frame resonances or something. And that's where I was talking about the dynamic notch jumps on those and hits those and whacks those out. So this is the roll axis, you can see them here, and then when I go to filtered, you can see they're all gone here, and obviously this big spike as well, because the RPM notch filters are focusing on the stuff that the motors are generating. So all this other stuff that's around the edges, the dynamic notch frees that up so they can jump, the dynamic notch can jump on those peaks. Again, pitch axis, you can see a little bit of spikes there, and then this is the motor noise band, and then this is filtered. So my assessment, basically looking at some logs, is this thing is doing really well for, there's no electrical noise or anything like that I'm seeing. There's no weird vibrations. It's looking really solid, especially for having that all-in-one board where the ESCs are on the flight controller. And since you really can't see the flight control board, this is what it looks like. So you can see there's the pads around the outside here to connect all the motors to. Here's the FETs. and then they have some capacitors here along each one. It's a neat little design, and this is the plug that plugs into the DJI unit. So it's a nice little compact board, seems to work pretty well, and I don't see any issues on it. Coming back to the setup, if we go into the modes tab, I want to change this up a little bit. So I'll put an image up, the DJI transmitter up, and as you can see on there, the switches, you basically have 4 auxiliary switches from the left of the transmitter to the right. Aux 1 is arming, 2 is the first one on the faceplate, 3 is on the other side of the faceplate, and 4 is back behind. And I want to use this for a couple things. I'm not really comfortable with the DJI just having an arm. In my OpenTX, I have a dual switch logical thing going on, so I have to pull up a momentary switch so I can arm the crafts, and that's not an option in DJI because they don't use OpenTX, but we can use pre-arming in Betaflight, so I want to get that set up so I don't mistakenly hit a switch and arm this thing. Also, I want to have some different behaviors for angle mode and things of that nature. So let me get this set up here. The first thing I would do is I'd bring back angle mode so it's on by default, which would be the top switch position, so all the switches are away from me, is my setup, and I'm going to have that on aux 2. I'm going to unhide the other modes here, and I want to do a couple things. I do want to have a beeper, do want to have Blackbox, do want to have erase Blackbox, and I do want to have pre-arming as well. So those are the things I look for, so we can go ahead and hide these now. On my beeper, I want that to be on aux 2 as well, and I want that when I pull the switch all the way to me, since there are 3 position switches, that it goes and starts to beep the motors. When it's in the middle of the aux 1, that's when it's in rate mode. Another thing I forgot to add here is air mode, so we'll turn that on there as well. What I want for air mode is that when I'm not in angle mode, that air mode enables. So I'm going to go ahead and set that to the middle for aux 2 here as well. So on that switch, when I'm, it's away from me, it's in angle mode. That's probably the default I want for just normal flying. Then in that case, motor stop would be inactive, so if I arm, the motors won't spin up by default, but if I bring that aux 2 switch to the middle position, I'll be in rate mode, angle mode won't be on, and air mode will enable, so when I do a flip in rate mode, I have full control with having 0% throttle. On aux 3, I want to have Blackbox logging. I don't want it as the default. This only has 8 mega flash, which is enough, but it's not a ton, so I want to be very deliberate when I'm doing my Blackbox logging. So since the default, with all my switches away from me, would be for aux 3 to be at 1,000, that won't be on. But if I put it into the middle, then I'll have Blackbox logging. And then if I pull it all the way towards me, I want it to go ahead and erase the Blackbox flash, so that if I'm out there and I can't remember if I erased the flash before I came out, that I can go ahead and do that in the field. The last thing is pre-arming. I want to have that on aux 4. So that I have to have aux 4 all the way towards me before I go ahead and switch aux 1 up for it to arm. If it's not both of them at the same time, it won't arm. I wish DJI had a momentary switch on their transmitter. They do have momentary buttons, but none of them seem to trigger these aux modes, aux 1, 2, 3, and 4. So the best I can do is just use one of the 3 position switches with this aux 4. What I probably want to do here is also switch air mode all the way up so that if I'm not in angle in any scenario for aux 2, that air mode is enabled. Okay, so just to give you a rundown then again, this is my arming switch in the back. So this will be all the way up for arming, but won't work unless my pre-arm switch, which is over here in aux 4, is all the way up as well. So both have to be up. Pre-arm would have to be up first. Then I could bring the arming up, and then it will arm. Obviously, it's not arming here on Betaflight because we're plugged into the USB. It's a safety feature. This will be my flight mode switch here, so you can see as I move that to the center position, I'm deactivating angle mode, but I'm activating air mode. And then if I go down to here, it will activate my beepers. And then go back, and then I can go back to angle mode, which will be my default, because I always have the switches pushed away. Here it's going to be Blackbox, so if I click that into the middle, when I arm, I'll be recording Blackbox, or if I'm in the middle of a flight, it will start to record Blackbox. If I want to erase Blackbox, I go ahead and hit this down to the bottom and let that hold for 30 seconds, and then it will erase the flash. And finally down here, just so you can see the pre-arm, of course that will need to be in pre-arm before I can arm, but again, since we're hooked up to USB, it's not going to arm. Now the other thing I want to do is go in and switch my rates, so my rates change based on either an air mode or an angle mode. So I'm going to go ahead and hit expert mode here, go down to adjustments and clear. I'm going to click on the enable adjustments, set it to aux 2, and then change it to be rate profile selection. And I'm going to also change this to aux 2 as well. And I'm going to grab the selector here and have this expand all the way across, and then I'm going to go ahead and hit save for that. If we go back to the PID tunings tab, go to the rate profiles. Now as you can see on here, as I switch aux 2, my rate profile right here changes. Now do note when I go into beeper mode, it's going to switch me to rate profile 3. So what I'll probably do there is hit copy rate profile values. I'll be on rate profile 2. And I'll copy those to rate profile 3. Since rate profile 3 is also when the beepers are active, it's going to also be rate mode, so I want to have the same rate. So rate profile 2 and 3 now are the same thing. Not that I'll be in beeper mode while I'm trying to fly, but if I hit it by mistake. Hi, it's Mark from the future. I want to make sure in this part of the video it's super clear that between rate profile 1 and 2, your rates in angle mode are not defined by these, at least for pitch and roll. For yaw it is, so this yaw rate is defined in this rate tab right here. What we're adjusting between rate profile 1 and 2 are really this TPA and this throttle expo. To adjust the feel while you're in angle mode, you want to be back on the PID profile settings and down here under angle strength and angle limit. Those are your two things. Angle limit will limit how far it can tip forward or off to the side in degrees. And angle strength, really, it's like a rubber band. If you want it to be smoother on the stick, so the same amount of stick movement has a little bit less effect on the quadcopter moving, that's where you're going to want to reduce this angle strength down. And that's just a number you need to play with, move it up or down. Of course, with the latest DJI firmware flashed on the air unit and on the goggles, you have the custom Betaflight OSD here. This is all pre-set up by the manufacturer. I'm not going to mess with this, but you can obviously put the goggles on and start moving this stuff around to see where you like these items to be on the screen. Video transmitter is not relevant with the DJI system. And then the final thing I want to do is go into Blackbox recording. If you're doing PID tuning, you could really take this down to 1 kilohertz or even 500 hertz. You just don't need that much fidelity in the data for PID tuning. But if you're looking at the filter stuff, yeah, 2K is where I'd recommend going with it. Final thing of note that you will need to have a battery plugged in for the DJI transmitter to work with seeing things move in the receivers tab. And by factory default, it is set to baud fast mode. So make sure in the goggles, DJI goggles that you have, it's set to baud fast. You can change that here if you'd like, but I'd recommend just setting it to baud fast. It reduces the frame rates down to like 3 milliseconds or 3 to 4. It varies a little bit depending on how far you're away from yourself. But Crossfire, for example, 6 millisecond frame rate, same thing as R9. DJI goes down all the way to 3. So you're getting a little bit more fidelity and how quickly the transmitter and how smooth the transmitter is updating your set point for this thing to track it. If you type in get SBus, and if you spell it right, you can see it's set here. SBaud fast is set to on. And again, I would just leave that on, but you can change it. Okay, so that is it for the setup. Some tweaks I would make from the factory stuff. Did a pretty good job on getting some things there. I just, these are really personal preference thing, and hopefully that shows you some new techniques to adjust your rates at the same time you're going into different modes. I think it's very applicable for the Cinebees since they kind of live in two different worlds to some extent. And from here, let's go out and do some flights and see what we can see on the tune. So for that, one of the things we want to do is make sure to set feed forward to 0 here. So we're just seeing the balance between the D term and P term. The other thing I want to do is set the D-min to off and set this to 45 since that was the D-min value. And we're going to see how that goes because that's basically their P and D balance. Whatever the D-min was set at, that's what your D gains really are, 99.9% of the flight. It's only when you do sharp stick moves that it boosts it up. So we're going to turn D-min off so we don't have D term moving all around. We're going to move those D-min gains over into the D term column here. Now with feed forward off, we're just looking at the P term and the D term. You could say, well, there's still the I term in there, but not really. With I term relaxed, set to gyro and 10. As soon as you do a sharp stick move, it's going to lock I term so there's no wind up, and it really takes I term out of the equation for any sharp stick moves so we can really see the balance between those two. Okay, so now we're going to go out, do some flights, do some sharp stick moves, do some flips and rolls outside in acro mode and see how the PID loop's reacting.